All right. Hello, everybody. Glad to have you with us. I am Diana Mackay, and I'm in the office of the Provost at Aga Khan University. And we're going to get started in just a moment here with the webinar. But as we gather the participants together, I'll just maybe do a slow start by commenting a little bit on the Innovation Committee at Aga Khan University, which is the host for this webinar today. And I'm a member of that Innovation Committee, and I've been active at the university for many years now, trying to galvanize the theme of innovation at AKU and to make connections internally with partners across the geographies that we work in, and also with other international partners. And it's been a wonderful experience. And I think today will be just a little glimpse into the kinds of things that we're doing at the Innovation Committee. With us today, we've got a number of participants on that journey of innovation at AKU, including Dr. Zainab, who is the chair of the Department of Medicine at Aga Khan University, and she'll be giving us some welcome remarks in just a moment. We have two presenters, Dr. Babar Hasan and Dr. Zahra Hoodbhoy, who are pediatricians at Aga Khan University and doing, I think what you'll see in a moment is truly wonderful work that integrates artificial intelligence and machine learning and use of technology in healthcare in a way that will, I'm going to assure you, change the nature of the game, and you'll see that shortly. And we also have Farhana Alarakhiya with us, who is our new Chief Data Innovation Officer. And Farhana, forgive me, I'll get better at pronouncing your last name, Alarakhiya, I think. How'd I do? Farhana comes to us at Aga Khan University from the private sector, where she's been working in the startup environment for many years. She's got a terrific background, and she's going to add fuel to the work that we're all doing. And as we think through how to use data science and use startup mentality and capacities to help people like our presenters today that are doing really innovative work with technology. So without further ado, I will also just mention we've got a couple of other members of our innovation team with us. They are going to facilitate the chat and the question and answer capacity, which is turned on for the webinar today. So you can chat, you can ask questions. I would encourage you to use the chat function to ask, both to introduce yourself as we get going, give us your name, your organization, why you're with us. And if you'd like to pose questions in the chat, feel free to do that as well. We'll do our best to answer them in the moderated session when we are finished with the presentation. And so we've also got a number of participants with us. I think we had well over 100 people sign up. And so thank you for your time today. We're looking forward to a good discussion. So without further ado, Zainab, can I turn to you for a few words of welcome?
Thank you so much, Diana. Welcome to this exciting series that aims to highlight tech and innovative solutions, data-driven in developing countries. My name is Zainab, and for those of you who missed the earlier part of the introduction, I'm a cardiologist, a clinical researcher, and I serve at AKU as the chair of the Department of Medicine. I also serve on the AKU Innovation Committee along with Diana and others, and as the founding director of the Citric Health Data Science Center. Our collective vision for a better future across the world has been articulated so well in the Sustainable Development Goals. Now, whether we use data to understand and track our progress to achieving the SDGs or to improve the prediction of disease and ultimately outcomes, data have become essential to our collective efforts. Such incredible amounts of information are being produced day in and day out. And these digital exhausts across multiple industries can be used to track and improve health. Now, Wikipedia defines data science as a multidisciplinary field that uses scientific methods, processes, algorithms, and systems to extract knowledge and insights from many structured and unstructured data. We have seen data science in action most recently in this pandemic. Take the use of cell phone data in the pandemic in understanding transmission and disease spread, the prediction of caseloads to guide resource allocation across various countries. You will hear shortly from Babar and Zahra about the use of big data for outcome prediction in certain disease states. These are just some examples. The potential for data science is enormous, especially in low middle income countries, as it allows us the opportunity to leapfrog in innovation, play outside the constrained resource box, leverage an early investment in information technology, and aligns very well with our traditional love for what we call jugaad. To be able to truly realize the potential here, health professionals, IT professionals, engineers, community, and patients have to work together to ensure a product of value, to ensure equity, representativeness, and scalability. We at the newly launched Health Data Science Center at AKU hope to bring together such a phenomenal multidisciplinary group. And in the work, and it's truly phenomenal work that Zahra and Babar have done, and will be sharing with you in collaboration with many others, you will realize that important theme come across. So without much further ado, back over to Diana.
Thanks so much, Zainab. And what we're going to do now to get, instead of jumping straight into the presentation, I wanted to sort of give everybody an understanding of what we're trying to accomplish in the hour here and a bit of a glimpse into the people who you're going to hear from. And so in terms of what we're trying to accomplish, I think there's really three objectives. One, we want to explain and showcase how technology can transform outcomes for major social impact. And I think you're going to see that shortly. We secondarily want to inspire would-be innovators and entrepreneurs and data scientists to emulate or in very different ways undertake the same kind of journey that Dr. Babar and Dr. Zahra have undertaken. And third, we really want you to reckon with the realities, the hard, cold facts associated with likelihood of success in innovative undertakings. If you're lucky and you're innovative and you do it well, you might be so fortunate to change the world. And that's what I think we're trying to do here. And Dr. Babar and Dr. Zahra, if you are successful in what you're undertaking, then there will not be a need, as I understand it, for perinatal cardiac surgeons to have the same workload that you might have today. And so I'd like to begin just by asking you to share a little bit about yourselves in a get to know you question. And that is, what do you plan to do in the next phase of your career if what you're doing today is as successful as I think it's going to be? Dr. Babar, you first. Where are you going to go next?
Thank you very much for the introduction. So I think it has been an exciting journey up till now, and the journey of really kind of learning a very different and evolving field, a journey of humility, a journey of understanding that the medicine of 21st century is something that in which many people who are non-medical will have to come together to solve the issues. You know, engineers, as Zainab very well pointed out, data scientists, computer engineers, all of them coming together. So we're kind of, as a unit on this journey. And inshallah, our plan is to, start validating some of our work that we've done, and then eventually really transcribing it into a practical solution downstream. Because if it doesn't change the outcomes, in my view, that science, has in some way or form has to change the outcome of the community that you are trying to, study, or this community from where you have gotten the data. So our next journey is going to be validation, and then eventually creating decision support systems and really tracking whether we have changed the outcome of what we wanted to do.
And Dr. Zahra, would you like to comment as well?
Sure. Thank you, Diana, and thank you, Dr. Babar. Yes, this journey has definitely been unconventional. I'll speak a bit about my personal journey because I did leave clinical medicine, which is not expected of an AQ alum. Clinical medicine is what is the path most of us take, but I decided to take a different route. Not sure initially where I was going, but eventually found what drives me the most is impacting lives at a larger scale. And this merger of technology, data, healthcare, engineering, a cross-cutting theme across several disciplines is where my passion lies. And that is the path that I want to continue to solve it for problems that are very relevant to us. Because if we don't solve our own problems, nobody else can do that for us. So that's where I want to be.
Well, we look forward to following both of you. And I've put your bios in the chat just to save a little bit of time, but remarkable careers that you have had to date, both of you. So I think what I'll do now is invite you to share your presentation, and then we'll turn following that to Farhana for a few reactions from her perspective, and then open up the dialogue. So Zahra, I think I'll turn to you next. Thanks.
Thank you, Diana. I'm going to share my screen now. Are we good there?
Looks good. Thank you.
Okay, great. So thank you, first of all, to the entire Innovation Committee for giving us an opportunity to give you a glimpse into this unconventional journey that we talk about, a path that we decided to take differently to impact communities that we work in. That was where this university all began, impacting lives at a larger scale. And this is what we hope to achieve. I'm presenting today, but my mentor, Dr. Babar Hasan, is right here. And I also represent a lot of the collaborators that which we will be alluding to towards the end of this talk, who have actually come together for all this to happen. Also, because we work across industry and academia, this disclosure is important, which I take on behalf of Dr. Babar and myself. So when we got on to this journey, thinking about what do we want to do to impact lives, what is the bigger purpose, what is going to drive us, and the idea was that most of us know Pakistan, like many other low middle income countries, did not meet the maternal and child health indicators in the Millennium Developmental Goals. Now, with 5 years gone for the SDGs, what are we doing differently that we're going to achieve these peaceful, inclusive, healthy, sustainable societies? How are we going to get there? And that paradigm shift of getting to these inclusive, healthy societies will come when we move away from survival to thriving children, thriving adolescents, thriving moms. And that is where the entire ethos of our group is built around, moving from survival to thrival of the child. And when we talk about the SDG, of course, SDG 3 directly links to health and well-being. And health and well-being in this context that is of interest to us is the mother and the child. When we talk about health, there are a few things that are essential to deliver healthcare services. We need the workforce, right? WHO has predicted that by 2030, we will have a shortage of 18 million healthcare providers, majority in low middle income countries like ours. In Pakistan, we know we do not have an adequate skilled care provider to a population ratio. How then, in a country like ours, where we have high burden of disease, be it MNCH related or non-communicable, and with a very limited trained care provider, how are we going to achieve this balance? I want you to hold that thought there, because there is light at the end of this tunnel. Ironically, in countries like ours, where basic commodities such as water, sanitation, electricity, education is rare, is expensive, technology is on the boom. 90% of users in Pakistan have access to a phone, 40% have access to mobile broadband, all indicating that technology is exponentially rising in our part of the world. And that is where the cusp of this integration of technology and medicine needs to occur. Leverage technology to fulfill the deficit that is of the care providers. So task sharing is the principle that forms the ethos of a lot of what we do. We have a huge minimally trained care provider workforce. We have technology, but we have very limited skilled providers. What do we do next? We use the merger of technology and AI to equip this minimally trained care provider to become a high quality triage. Send those who need to get to a high level tertiary care facility using this innovative tools. But those who are low risk, please keep them in the community and manage them there, because that is the only way we can efficiently and effectively utilize resources. When we speak about AI and global health, people really look at us with raised eyebrows and thinking, you belong to a population that has several issues. You've not been able to overcome issues like high maternal mortality. Are you sure you're talking about AI and big data here? Yes, we are. And this was validated by the USAID's report in 2019, which talked about how global health can benefit from artificial intelligence. And the 4 key areas that experts then thought of would have the most impact were population health. So how can we improve population health using tech and big data analytics for the individual patient themselves? How can this be more data driven, but of course needs a very engaged individual? The frontline health worker, the task sharing principle really applies to this worker here. And for clinical decision support, because we have several physicians out there who may be trained, but have lack of diagnostics or management care pathways. And how can we then empower them to deliver care in a better and more efficient manner? These 3 areas have been where our work mostly revolves. And that brings me to take you through a journey of some of our projects that we are doing here at the Alarakhiya University using these principles. As I would say, our claim to fame is our doctoral project, which initially began in 2018, where we had collaborators visiting in, and this report came out at that time as well, which labeled Pakistan as the riskiest place for the child to be born. Even worse than sub-Saharan Africa and Afghanistan, highest neonatal mortality for a child dying in the first day of life. What we lack is, how do we identify that high-risk pregnant mother who is going to have such a bad outcome? There are models developed in the West, but use biomarkers, either blood or placental, which we don't have access to. So does that mean we let women and children die? But we also know through science that there are other ways that we can possibly assess whether this fetus is in a compromised state. And that is what we decided to do on a small scale, on just about 700 pregnant women in one of our peri-urban field sites, where we started looking at the fetal heart and vessels to see if we could in any way predict whether this pregnancy would end up in a bad outcome. And our work with our collaborators internationally did support that evidence. Even in such a small population with just 700 pregnant women with 6% only bad outcomes, our model was more than 80% sensitive in picking up deaths. And this led to a validation grant, which now we are working on, where we aim to collect data on 6,000 pregnant women and see how this model works and how a decision support built in this model can change the outcome. But the baby survives the first day of life, but the first month of life still remains very critical. Our neonatal mortality rates are still very high. We've been able to decrease them slightly, but we still have high burden of disease, 3rd highest neonatal mortality in the world. How can we at a community level, again, using that same minimally trained care provider, identify which child will be at high risk? Now imagine a community health worker walks into a household, has a simple device like a pulse oximeter. We've all heard of this device now with the pandemic. The pulse oximeter became a household device for many of us, unfortunately. A simple device like that, which just gives you an O2 sat, but behind that is a whole data set that can give you a lot more information about the vessels, about the heart, about the respiratory system of the child, that can help you identify whether this child at the very basic level is sick or is a well child. And on a small data set, if you can see on the right hand of the screen, we could cluster. So at very initial work, very preliminary data shows that we can actually cluster difference between those who are well and those who are sick. And that is what we want at the community level. We want to identify those who are at risk and bring them to a facility where they can be treated. We don't want everyone to come there. But once they come to a facility, how do we know what the child is suffering from? There are 3 big killers of neonates in Pakistan: preterm, birth asphyxia, sepsis. Infections are big, unfortunately, still, due to many practices in countries such as ours. And WHO has several algorithms that can help manage children at primary care facilities. But how do we then identify the kids with neonatal sepsis? I mean, we know there are some screening tools, but the sensitivity is low to pick up children in the community. We don't want unnecessary antibiotic use leading to antimicrobial resistance. So how do we pick that? We have now partnered with this company in the US and trying to build what we call an artificial nose. So a nanosensor-enabled device, which through 2 to 3 ml of the neonate saliva can pick up electrochemical properties and possible metabolites, which can help predict sepsis. And that is where we can then complement the WHO tool and increase its sensitivity to pick up common infections and treat them with antibiotics at a community level. We can also, through that same device, probably pick up other infections and other new emerging viruses, which we just recently encountered with the pandemic. But now we've saved the child. The first month is saved, the child has survived. But when the child grows older, the 5 to 15-year-old, when these children are really developing skills to contribute back to society, it's their time to learn, is when infections still are around us. Remember, water sanitation still remains inaccessible to a large part of our population. Diseases such as rheumatic heart disease are prevalent in our part of the world still. Pakistan has the 3rd highest mortality from rheumatic heart disease across the globe. We know that rheumatic heart disease, the entire spectrum of rheumatic heart disease has a period of asymptomatic disease. It is this time where if one intervenes, can have the best outcome, because you can pick up children who may have some abnormalities that have affected the heart valves and can prevent them from long-term complications where there's complex disease and which requires much more healthcare support and also affects quality of life. The traditional approach to pick up these asymptomatic, because they're absolutely normal young children going to school, is doing echoes. Echoes are expensive. You need trained sonographers to do that. How do you democratize technology? How do you get to screen all children, for instance, in a citizen foundation school? How do you get to do that? A digital stethoscope, which was used many, many years ago by physicians to diagnose a lot of things, has now come back into limelight. So your phonocardiogram, along with the ECG, and coupled with a machine learning algorithm, can help pick up sounds which may be inaudible to the human ear, but there may be patterns across these both which can help identify that this child may have a valve that is affected by this disease and may need a higher level referral. So this is some work that we plan to do with schools in Karachi and see whether a device such as this can enable us to identify children and thus improve outcomes, both in terms of academic outcomes as well as health outcomes. The last one that I really want to talk about is ethiometry, because this platform is actually right now up and running in the pediatric ICU at Alarakhiya University. We are the only site outside US, UK, and Canada that has such a tool available to us, where based on the tool, a frontline care provider such as a nurse can predict whether this child who has had a recent cardiac surgery due to congenital heart disease may have an adverse outcome. Our pediatric intensivists and nurses are using it in the PICU and have shown improvement in outcomes in about a year already of this being implemented. So real life implementation of AI and technology already here at the university. But all this work, and this is just some of our work that I got to showcase today, has been created de novo. And that is the beauty of the Alarakhiya University, where we have been given a nurturing environment where we were able to take this unconventional path, think of technology, think of how to involve other partners, both industry, academic partners from medicine, as well as other domains such as engineering. So we've partners from local partners like Ghulam Ishaq Khan University and international partners like those from Barcelona who helped us actually to develop our thinking around how to solve contextual problems and also help us provide the domain engineering expertise. And just before I end, this is a staple slide that Dr. Babar and I use for most of our talks. And for those who can't read Urdu, it says, "Hamari dunya, hamari zimmedari." It's our world, our responsibility. This was something that a class 5 child had put up in one of our camps, and we thought this statement summarizes our work perfectly. And this is the ethos of our group. So thank you very much. And with that, I'll hand back to Diana.
Thanks, Dr. Zahra. I'm going to change my position just slightly from one of you're putting yourself out of business to one of you are changing what you do, I think, year by year. And before I invite Farhana to comment, I guess, Dr. Babar, would you like to add anything to what Zahra's presented?
Oh, thank you very much, Zahra, for this amazing presentation. In fact, I think one other work that we just recently got published, literally like a couple of weeks ago, is a prediction model that we used on the brain waves of a child, EEG, that was done at 4 years of age, that predicted which child will do poorly academically 4 years later. So that was some work that was done in interior part of Sindh, and we had access to those EEGs data. We did some machine learning on them, and we had some really cool proof of concept. So that's the only other thing that I would add to this whole presentation. But overall, I think, as Zahra pointed out very well, is that, you know, our journey this is just the beginning of it, because at the end of this, what we really want to see is an impact on the community. All of this work turning into a decision support system that you know, assists the frontline worker, assists the physicians. You know, classic example is ethiometry. You know, it assists the nurses, it assists the clinicians in picking adverse events in the ICU. So we want some of that to happen down the line.
Thanks. Thanks very much for giving us this glimpse into the work that you two are doing. And Farhana, maybe I could ask you then, you're coming into this conversation fresh from other places where you've been working in your career on startup sort of activities. And I would welcome you to share with us a little bit about what you're seeing as you join AKU in our innovation space, and what you see from the presentation today around the kinds of themes and issues and activities we should be adding to our conversation.
Thanks, Diana. So the first thing I'm going to comment on is I was very pleased with both Dr. Zainab's comments and Dr. Babar's comments, because I'm an engineer, but I always wanted to be a doctor, but now you're inviting me into the family. So I'm quite happy about that. A quick intro on myself. So my name is Farhana Alarakhiya. I'm on day 19 on the job. And I come from, 25 years in big data, in data and analytics, the last 12 in big data. So building, platforms, big data platforms, primarily in the space of helping enterprises either make money or save money. And so what I really find interesting about healthcare is the application of AI or decision support has all been around efficiency and optimization. Like when you look at other industries, when I was having an initial conversation with, Dr. Babar and Dr. Zahra, they talked that AI was late to come to healthcare. And I concur with that. But the reason that AI was late to come to healthcare is twofold. So number one is access to the type of technology. Like we have technology today where, basically you were showing a nano hardware device. We have nano hardware devices that can process volumes and volumes of data. And when you are in healthcare, you need that capability. But most and foremost, I would say, is when we looked at the four goals that were identified in terms of application of AI, AI in healthcare is an enabler. We've used this word quite a bit, and it is there to assist. It's about proactive preventative care. It's not about efficiency. It's not about optimization. It is about aiding and expanding that knowledge. So if we can understand, what are the triggers for certain cardiometabolic disease? Can we prevent them earlier on? If we can understand in pregnancy, in utero, what could potentially, like Dr. Zahra said, a challenging pregnancy, we can take proactive preventative care to basically avoid a non-desirable outcome. And that is what I find fascinating. The part that is going to be very interesting is how do you bring this all together, right? In a manner that is open to all, that is inclusive, that is ethical. And I don't think, I know that, you know, Dr. Babar and Dr. Zahra are saying we'll be out of a role potentially. I don't think that's ever going to happen, because I see it as an enabler in terms of helping to avoid, you know, undesirable outcomes. And so I'm super excited to be joining AKU at this time, because I think the world is, it's our oyster, if that's the right saying. The world really is our oyster, because what we have in our repositories is basically the answers to what impacts low LMICs, low middle income countries, in terms of potential preventable disease, efficacies of medicine, looking at genetic structures. We have all of that. What we now need to do is bring this multidisciplinary team together to mine that, to come up with not just research papers, but transfer those into care protocols in kind, in practice. That's where the impact comes. And that's why I love seeing this type of work, because it is pragmatic. And yes, there is research impact coming out of it, but it is translatable. One of my big philosophies is, you know, we as a world, we suffer from what I call drip. We're data rich. We have data everywhere these days. It's everywhere. It's captured in every single element, but we are insight poor. But I'm going to take that a step further. Understanding the insight, knowing the insight is the first step. You need to make it actionable. That is when impact hits. And as you can see, you know, just from the 4 or 5 projects that they walk through, intense impact.
Impact in low and middle income countries that are often extraordinarily resource constrained and sometimes operating in conflict settings. It's not easy. Zainab, I would welcome you to jump in here too if you'd like to, but I'd welcome Dr. Babar and Dr. Zahra to talk a little bit about what have been sort of the biggest challenges in working where you do in some of the difficult neighborhoods and without a high level of resources that you can draw on. What have been some of the challenges and how have you overcome them?
Zahra, you want to take it first, and then I can do it.
Sure. Thank you. So absolutely. So the work that we've showcased here mostly is at a community site, right? So that is where really the challenge is, where there is the doctor population ratio is definitely altered. There's minimal access to care provision. And the challenges there have been, of course, first of all, just setting up this kind of work, right? So for AI, we all know, and for that matter, any research project, garbage in, garbage out, we all know that. So the first step was getting high quality data. How do you ensure that in a remote setting, you get good quality data? So teamwork, definitely our field teams. We had our best sonographer trained under Dr. Babar and the pediatric cardiology team at AKU was actually sitting in the community acquiring these scans because we needed the best image to train the model. Of course, this is not scalable, but at the initial phase, this is what you need to even show that there is signal in this data. There is more to it than what the eye can see. So finding that person, finding driven person to work in such a setting is the first challenge. Then, of course, we have the data set. Do we have the capacity to analyze that data set? I mean, clearly, Dr. Babar and I do not have that. We had to look for partners. We had to look for partners across different domains. So engineering domains, we even explored some mathematicians, you know, because it all revolves around flow through vessels. And so how do principles of physics apply here? So we reached out to many people. Some worked, some didn't work. So partnerships has been a key to get this work done as well. Dr. Babar, over to you.
Yeah, and I think as a clinician, I think the biggest challenge that I face, and also, you know, which adds to the complexity is again how to make it practical and pragmatic, which basically means creating a framework of intervention. So In a predictive model, yes, after prediction, what next? That question, those creation of standard operating procedures, that creation of that pipeline. Just to give you an example, when we were doing this project in the community, there were several kids that we identified who had congenital heart disease. So now what? Where do we get them to get operated, and who's going to support their care? These are people who just can't, who don't have any means of supporting. So that complete ownership, and not just thinking that we're just there in the community to get our data and yet another paper out and yet another grant to come. But I think that becomes challenging at times, because just to create that whole pipeline, just to create that whole means or framework. And I think that is what was really beneficial working from an institution that has all of that framework or platform in the background. That so we brought these kids over to Aga Khan, we got them operated, we rehabilitated them. So it's not. So you can, the community also then starts trusting you, that you are not there just to do yet another study. You are actually there to solve their problems and actually be a part of their team in making them more healthy.
So could I ask both of you about the skills that you think future doctors will need that are going to be in the kinds of careers that you're working in? You've talked a little bit just now about partnership building and putting in place the right people, drawing on the capacities that the university has to support you. But you also need to be obviously top of your game in your profession, and you're trained in your specialty. How do you balance the demands for you to have all these different kinds of skills in the world that we're now emerging into?
That's a great question, Jan, and I think I was actually giving this talk to some high school students a couple of days ago, and I told them very clearly that stick to your math. You need to really know your mathematics very, very well, because I strongly believe that the core of data science, the core of algorithms is actually mathematics. So if you have good command of that. And then also I told them, I actually gave them examples of actually learning programming, learning how to code in Python, learning JavaScripts, because I think that is going to be a skill that is going to be needed as a medical professional coming out. If you don't know them, even if you have a very strong engineering team sitting next to you, helping you out, you need to at least understand the lingo. And that whole collaborative work comes through if you also have done your homework. And I think as medical schools will evolve, I think this will in fact become a very core part of their teaching and learning and stuff. But above all of this, more philosophically, I would say, what needs to be taught to professionals like physicians. We at sometimes are very egoistic and ego-driven. And I think when you get into, and me and Zahra have gone through these phases in which we were sitting in the room with a bunch of engineers, and we felt as if we are like class 2 students, grade 2 students, literally didn't know anything that they were talking about. And I think that, and at that point, literally, being humble about it, throwing out your ego and saying, okay, there is somebody who is also very capable, and you can learn from them. And it's easier said than done. For people, especially who are at the top of their profession, who are taking strong decisions and stuff. And I think as that evolution happens, you really learn together to the extent that by the end of this whole project, our engineers were reading fetal Dopplers better than some of our cardiologists. And we understood some of the algorithms, not as good as them, but at least to somewhat, we had some understanding.
I'd just like to add to that. So I think besides the skills that Dr. Babar mentioned, extremely important, what we also need is an inquisitive mind, right? We want to cultivate that the deep thinking. Why are we doing what we want to do? Where is it that our passion lies? And the courage then to take that path, right? It is difficult to move away from a conventional path. It comes with a lot of challenges. But if you're up for it, and if you have the drive in the right place, then a path like this becomes slightly easy.
So this is a terrific moment for me to put in a plug, just that, and I'll turn to you, Farhana. I'll put in a plug here for the CCIT forum at AKU, which is designed to take medical school students, nursing school students, any students, and come into a place where there's a mindset change on the horizon for you if you participate in any of their programs. And I think that's a terrific part of AKU and is also a very sort of foundational part of the innovation work that AKU is doing. Farhana.
I was just going to validate both your comments in terms of, so I come from like building software. So that's the world I come from. And that is successful only when you have a multidisciplinary team. And it's not a multidisciplinary team when you work in silos. It's really understanding each other and what your strengths are. So, you know, like as an engineer, the first thing, like when I was building systems way back then, I'm not going to say how old I am, way back then, it, you know, when you didn't understand the business domain, right, then you're going to end up with something that is completely ridiculous, right? So it's really about that coupling of both understanding the outcome that you want to achieve, the problem that you're trying to solve. And what I love what you said, Dr. Zahra, is the curiosity. Curiosity is key right now in terms of being able to drive innovation. And in order to be curious, you also have to be humble because you don't know. And what you don't know is where you uncover things. I can tell you, like one of the last projects that I built, you know, shamefully, I wasn't curious. I'm like, oh, you know what? We know what's going to happen. And we ran an experiment and it was amazing the type of outcomes that we discovered, right? And it's because, you know, and if somebody hadn't pushed me, I wouldn't have run it. And so that curiosity piece is really, really important. Some people make assumptions, and often those assumptions, if not validated, can take us down the wrong path.
So great feedback there, Farhana. And I'm so excited because there's a couple of really outstanding questions that I want to pose to the panel. And Zainab, I'm going to include you in this because you might have some interesting reflections on this question as well. But in the chat, the question is, can you share comments about how AI is cost effective? So I'd love to ask you for whether in reality your AI work is proving to be cost effective. But in addition, what a wonderful question here in the Q&A about, can we do randomized controlled trials to understand how algorithms perform in real settings, just like we do for drugs and vaccines, so that the decision making we have in a resource constrained setting is actually based on some evidence about things like cost effectiveness and effectiveness in general. So Dr. Zahra, why don't we turn to you first, and then we'll do a roundtable approach.
Sure, absolutely. So I'll take the first question, cost effectiveness, right? So as of now, if you ask me our own data, we wouldn't have that. But just think about training an obstetrician and several of them to identify high-risk pregnant women in really good. Is that feasible? Would you be able to set up a center like that, have an obstetrician, and along with all the other resources and infrastructure that you would need for her to sit there? Instead, you have a minimal trained care provider who has a handheld device, which can plug into any Android device and can pick up basic features on a scan, which can also be AI guided, like, you know, what images to acquire. Just that entire broader concept to me seems to be pointing in the right direction, that we will be saving resources, both in terms of human resources, in terms of time, and in terms of cost. So that is my thought on that piece.
Babar?
You want me to? Yeah.
We could go around.
Yeah. Farhana, you know say something, or okay, I can. So yeah, so I'll take the first question and the second question. So absolutely, I think it is definite. We have not proven it for the time being, but there are several papers out there. There are several work that has been published that has shown that it is going to be. It is actually pretty cost effective. I'm actually involved with a lot of automation work with imaging, with adult echo imaging and pediatric echo imaging, echocardiogram, ultrasound imaging, and I can clearly see how quickly, you know, and how effectively and how accurately, you know, reports will be generated and making a lab efficient. I went and visited a radiologist in Chicago who reads in a 6-hour shift, reads close to 600 studies, which is, CT scans, ultrasound, you name it. And when somebody was telling me about it, in fact, one of our alumni, Dr. Khan Siddiqui, was telling us about it, I thought he was joking. And when I went and saw the way he was functioning and the way he was using technology to function and really improve his output, apart from the money that he was making, that's a separate story. But, this guy was audited at least 3 times because nobody believed him that he was able to do 600 studies or 706 hours. And every time the auditors basically came out and said, his process is just flawless. So I think it is, I have definitely seen it happening. It is extremely cost effective. It is done with as Farhana very well pointed out, with that mindset very clearly from the get-go, that you are here to solve a problem in a very practical, pragmatic approach and a scalable approach, not just write another paper or get a grant. And in some way and form, I sometimes a very early good paper or a good grant may actually derail your work. You need to go through those failures to really understand the depth of your work and to truly find your passion. The second thing, randomized controlled trials, absolutely. There's actually a very good paper out there on how to run trials in AI algorithms, and there are different ways of doing that. In fact, Dr. Kalbe Abbas, who is our cardiac intensivist, is planning to do a randomized trial on our AI algorithm, the ethiometry in our cardiac ICU, to see whether it's truly effective or not. But remember one thing, that we all think that the holy grail is randomized controlled trials. It's one of the most controlled way of looking at a human behavior. And we all know that the Hawthorne effect, when you are being observed, you will always act the right way. And I think so one has to have that change of mindset, as in, the disruptive mindset that, not every time we physicians are trained, randomized controlled trial, very good. No, because we all have gone through that a very well done randomized controlled trial, when you were practically implementing it in the community, it doesn't work the way it does. Even guidelines doesn't work the way it does. So how do we bring that nuance in? And I think AI is really bringing in those social determinants of health, is what they call, into the picture, and really kind of making us think in a different manner.
Zainab, why don't I invite you to come in next?
Yeah, I want to make a comment before I answer those questions. Then I thought the conversation around the fact that we have so many different disciplines working together, it's like almost like a new language being formed, right? The engineers speak a certain way. Doctors are notorious for speaking a certain way. And then you have business people and entrepreneurs and so on. And it's almost like, Urdu, the origins of Urdu it's called the language of the camp, because multiple different ethnicities and countries got together, the Turks, the Arabs, the Afghans, and people from the subcontinent, who then created a new language. So it's almost like that, philosophically speaking, and it's really quite wonderful to watch. And it's really quite wonderful to watch Zahra and Babar. I think they both have the fire in them. It's a curiosity, but it's really the fire to make a change and really pursue something doggedly. And both of them are doing that. For the 2 questions, it's a yes and a yes. The whole reason we'd be pursuing this is because it is cost effective. There is a possibility that in LMICs, we can do something that doesn't require too much in terms of resources. The task shifting and task sharing will actually cut back costs for us. But that's something that needs to be studied. And yes, papers need to be published on it, and that evidence needs to be shared with others. And I will put a plug for RCTs. I think the pandemic has proven that it's really important to have the evidence in the form of an RCT. We have had so many therapies that were touted as being the cure, but they weren't. And so, algorithms can be considered as investigational devices and should undergo the same rigor as other devices and drugs are put through.
Interesting observations, Zainab. Thank you. And Farhana?
So echoing a lot of the comments that have already been shared, I'll just put a different angle on it. And that is, in terms of AI being cost effective. So the one thing you need to think about is it's not a short-term project. If you're expecting it to be cost effective in 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, I can guarantee you 9,642%, it's not going to happen. It's a long-term thing because the initial investment that you are going to make in either building a platform, in building that repository, you need to make that initial investment. But the goal is it's proactive, preventative care for the long term. So whether it's comorbidity from a disease perspective, whether it is a negative event, right, that, potentially doesn't hit monetarily, but it hits your heart. Like say we talked about death in a child, right? So you need to think about it that way. From a technology perspective, we are now in an era where if you think about big data, the ability to put stuff on a cloud, there's different GPUs for processing. Like we are living in an era where processing power, storage is 1/10 what it was even 3 years ago. The second part of it is what you have is you have innovation coming in from all over the world. Because when you are using some of these new technologies, a lot of it is open source based, which means that you have communities working on this. And oftentimes you can have an issue at midnight, and usually by the next morning, somebody has solved it somewhere in the world. And all you're doing is you're plugging. So not only do you have efficiencies from a cost perspective, you also have efficiencies and effectiveness from a knowledge perspective. Like, so pooling all of that knowledge. All in all, like it's a very exciting time to be in, as long as we treat it, well, and we're very focused on the outcome, because sometimes technology just gets put in for the sake of technology, and usually that doesn't work well.
I think we only have time for one more round of questions, and I'll get to that in just a second, but I have to add a funny anecdote about Farhana. I love your term about DRIP, data rich, insight poor. That's fantastic. In this world of innovation, we will find that we are also working across generations, and we'll have some very senior people working with some very newcomers to the arena. And this business of the language that we use is important. And I have to say that when we talk about DRIP, maybe none of you would know this, but teenagers these days, they have this wonderful expression about whether you've got the drip or not. And it has nothing to do with data rich and insight poor, but I can assure you they're probably going to tell me I do not have the drip after I've just discussed this with you. But look, one last question would be, I've been peeking into who's joining us today, and there's some people with us who may be in a position to help. I think there's also some participants that would, like you, be wondering what they can do and what they need and where they can go to find what they need. So my question to you would be, what do you need at this point to advance your work? What's the top 1 or 2 things that if you had in your hands, you'd be in a terrific position? And Dr. Babar, you first.
So thank you very much, Diana. And so I think the biggest thing that we need is, somebody to help us with the whole concept of social innovation and scalability. Because we physicians at time, and again, I'm going to be that person who is in a for or against debate, very much against a randomized controlled trial, because we are just so stuck in that mentality that we don't think of practical solutions and solutions that work, and then eventually scaling it. And I think so. From if you were to ask us as a research or a group of people who are embarking on a very difficult and different journey, is to have that support to take us to the next level. And that next level is how do we scale? How do we scale it? How do we make it into a social innovation product? How do we get connected to impact financiers? How do we get connected? All of these things. How do we really connect to really enhancing our solutions? And not only do we bring to scale it and take it to other places and make a huge impact, but also as somebody who are innovators, have the ability to innovate further, have the ability or access to funds or resources that are not the typical standard grant cycles. Our sepsis work, the nanotechnology work, for example, has gone through 3 different granting agencies. It literally takes 6 months for each of them to respond. And and every time it is, oh, you need pilot data. Well, how would I get pilot data if I don't have a seed fund or whatever? So I think that's where that support can really help.
Zahra.
Yes, thank you. I just want to add to that, partnerships, key to what we do, right? Partnerships to build across industry and academic partners, because that's where, like, Silicon Valley is a classic example of that, right? Close to academic institutions like Stanford and Berkeley. AKU is a premier institution. We want people to partner with us so that we can build that ecosystem. We can build that ecosystem of innovation, of using technology to answer bigger problems. So if there are partners out there who would want to reach out to us, please do, because that's what we are looking for, both to help solve the problem from the engineering piece, but also when we want to scale it.
Super, thank you. And Farhana, what would you want to say about what we need?
I think it's very similar to what Dr. Zahra and Dr. Babar had already said, in that we need to partner. One of the things that many on the world stage don't recognize is what a premier institution AKU is, right? So how many know of the data innovations that are happening? I was in a conversation yesterday where, people are starting to realize and starting to recognize. And I think one of the things that happens sometimes in LMICs when they are partnering with, I'm going to call it the Western world, we sometimes take, I'm going to call it a submissive approach, versus I want us to ensure that we don't, because when it comes to LMICs, I'm sorry, we're the big boy, big girl, big, they, big there, right? So I want to be inclusive, but that's who we are. And we need to ensure on a couple of things is that there's always quid pro quo. I've been in some conversations where potentially, we want to give to get, but we need to make sure that they are giving as well to get. And so that would be my one reflection, is that when we enter into these partnerships, we want to make sure that it is mutually beneficial for both parties, right? In terms of moving forward. So for example, Dr. Babar's example, in terms of, hey, look, I have this hardware device. Well, now you need a trial, but how do you get that trial? So maybe with them, it's like, well, how about you sponsor a trial with me and I can prove the validity for you, because at the end, you're going to get something out of it as well. And those are the types of things we need to get more, like, what's the right word? Aggressive is not the right word, but what I'm trying to say is that would be the right approach to take. We honestly, like, if you think about all of our, different campuses that we have, the type of data that we're collecting, you think of the number of patients that we see, right? We are like, when you think of LMICs, we are going to be the data innovator, the data repository. I can guarantee you that. And therefore we need to pursue that with curiosity, with pragmatism, but also, with humility, but at the same time, also not take, I'm going to call it a backseat.
That strikes me, Farhana, as a terrific note for Zainab and I to carry back to the Innovation Committee, so that we can, in fact, add, a communications agenda, a promotion agenda, an awareness agenda to the work that we're doing. So I think just at that moment, I'll ask Zainab for one final word of wrap up from you, and then we'll close up.
I think actually my comment on the question that was asked, probably we can wrap up with that. I think the important word is freedom, right? Zahra and Babar have been able to do all this work because they had the freedom to exercise their creativity. And that is what most entrepreneurs, most researchers, and people who want to build something really new need. And that comes with money, partnerships, people getting out of the way, time, all of those things are required. And so I really hope that everybody who's been watching has been truly inspired by the work that's already been done by Babar and Zahra, and good luck to them in scaling and really moving forward on all the stuff that they've done. It will create impact. I am sure of it. I believe in them. And thank you so much, everybody, for watching.
Thank you, Zainab. I'll wrap us up. We're at the top of, or at the bottom of the hour now. We've completed the webinar's allocated time, but on behalf of the Innovation Committee, Dr. Babar, Dr. Zahra, thank you very much for the time you've put into preparing for this and for sharing your stories with us. Dr. Zainab, we know how busy you are. Thank you very much for your time. Farhana, it's going to be a pleasure to work with you. I think we can all tell already that you are adding a new perspective and wonderful skills and experience. So thank you for your participation as well. Thank you to my colleagues in IT and in the Innovation Committee team for supporting us with this webinar. Thanks to all the participants who have been with us today for your time. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.